Force on Force features the largest and strongest outdoor military organization in the country. These are the men and women who make it possible to enjoy the freedom to hunt and fish. It is with great pride that we bring you Force on Force podcast, coming to you from the Force on Force Talk.
Hey, welcome to the Force on Force podcast. We're coming to you the Force on Force Talk. I'm your host, Shawn Dalrymple. I know it's been a couple of weeks. Fall is always really busy with us doing hunting stuff. So we've been out doing a lot of hunting, trying to catch up. If you guys caught up with us on social media, I finally connected with one of my target bucks. I call him Split Brow Tine down in Alabama. Chased for 2 years on that buck. So a lot of time and effort put into that. But also we have a lot of work going into the Force on Force Army Buck Hunter TV show that's on the Sportsman's Channel right now. We got a couple archery bucks, one airing this week that we're showing on the TV show, and then a mouflon that we're going to hunt next week. So a lot of stuff going on, but we have a guy we're going to talk about today, Shawn Kaplan. He's a senior loan officer, branch manager for Cross Country Mortgage there in Franklin, Tennessee. We're going to talk a little bit more about it, but like I said, we've had a lot of busy stuff going on with hunting here in the fall as we kind of transition out of the fishing stuff to the hunting. The guys are actually at Canton, First Monday in Texas right now, working, doing a lot of cool stuff. And Shawn and I are going to sit down and talk about this. One of the coolest things about Shawn is he spells his name exactly like me, the correct way to spell it, S-H-A-W-N.
That's right.
So welcome, Shawn. Kind of introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you.
Thank you, Shawn. I appreciate it, man. I'm Shawn Kaplan. I'm a normal dude. I just live here right outside Nashville in Nolensville, Tennessee. I'm a father of two girls, 15 and 10. I'm married to my wife. We've been together for 17 years now. And I do mortgage finance. So I help people finance homes for a living. I've done that for about 24 years now. So, but most of all, I would probably say, I enjoy getting outside. I enjoy hunting. I enjoy spending time on the farm. I enjoy spending time with my friends. And I enjoy having great conversations like this. So, yeah, thanks for having me, Shawn.
Well, I think people are probably wondering why I'm having you on here. So here, I wanted to kind of introduce Shawn, how we kind of met. So this goes back to, I tell people all the time, always be nice to everybody. You never know who you're going to meet in life, right? And everybody hears us talk about our chaplain, Pastor Ron Caradoff. I mean, one of the greatest guys that we ever had. And I don't know, it's been almost maybe 10 years ago now at this point. And I was down in Alabama visiting my mom, and Ron said he was going to be fishing over in Scottsboro and Lake Gunnersville. And I told him, I said, man, once I come over there and go fishing with you, he's like, well, I got a guy with me. And I was like, well, dude, I got my big old new bass boat. I said, it won't be a big thing. I said, I'll just bring it. He said, I won't, it won't be a big deal for me. He said, you sure you want to do that? I said, man, it don't bother me the least little bit. So this is how I end up meeting Shawn Kaplan. I meet him on an excursion with Pastor Ron to hang out and didn't know who he was from anybody. He gets in the boat with us and we just go out and have a good time, share fellowship on the water, and get to meet Shawn. And kind of the relationship started from there. So I think that was kind of cool because I never knew you from anywhere, but I wanted to spend time with Ron. I knew you must have been a good guy if he was spending time with you.
Yeah, man, what a great guy. Ron's been a special, special dude in my life and a great friend and mentor and spiritual father. I mean, all those things. He's just a great, great guy. And, Shawn, I think that's a good example of kind of how my life has always panned out. There's always been, great men in my life that as I've been growing up, they were like, hey, you want to do this? Hey, you want me to show you how to do this? And so Ron, as I became friends with him, he liked hunting, he liked fishing. I like hunting, I like fishing, but I had gotten away from it for a long time. And he's like, well, we're going to take you to Gunnersville one day and catch you some big fish. So that's when the day he invited me to come down there with you. And I remember that big old shiny fancy bass boat, that first, I think it was one of the first times you took it out.
Yeah, it was.
I don't think you had to untie too many of my lines that I casted over you guys, but you helped me out that day. It was a beautiful day.
It was, and it started a relationship that Shawn and I kind of kept over the years, and I tell my boys all the time, I use that, scenarios like that. You never know. It's all about the chance meetings you have in life. You treat everybody with dignity and respect. You don't know who you're meeting because it may be, someone that you're supposed to meet in your life. And so Shawn's kind of been that guy. I mean, and what I found was he had a love for hunting, and he took me on a hunt that's probably one of my favorite hunts that I've had. He took me to his farm there in Tennessee when our younger son Ethan, and I killed a nice 8-point buck, and I shot a doe that day at a pretty long distance, and I think that's what Shawn knew that I could really shoot. And
Yeah.
But I still remember, like, I remember your look, and you messaged me afterwards and talking about that experience and being there with me and Ethan and how much it meant to you. And I didn't understand it at the time, and it was kind of cool to get to share that hunt with you and to hear you were just as excited to be there with us as it was.
Yeah, there was two parts of it that were super exciting for me. The first part was the fact that, I invited you out. That's a lot of pressure, right? And
Right.
I invited you guys out, especially with your son, and I'm like, man, I sure hope the deer show up today. And it just was textbook. I mean, deer came out, you got to pick one, and nice deer came out. Wasn't, a massive monster, but it was a nice deer. And watching you spend that time with your son and those pictures, I look at them often where you're sitting there and that smile on his face, and that sun was coming up behind you. I mean, I just love things like that. I love the mornings like that, but there was also the reason why I look at that picture is because it brings back special moments in my childhood,
Yeah.
I did not have a chance to go hunting with my actual father. He took his own life when I was 6 years old. He jumped off the Verrazano Bridge in New York City. He came to this country when he was only 6 years old. As an immigrant from Belarus, Minsk, Russia. So they were escaping the Holocaust. And at the age of 17, my father lied and joined the Marine Air Wing. And he was a tail gunner. And so he served 3 or 4 different, tours, survived them. And that tail gunner didn't have a high percentage likelihood of coming back. And he did it 3 or 4 times. And so ultimately that cost him his life. Long story short, they tried a bunch of stuff, lithium, shock therapy, like probably stuff that didn't make it better. But in 1983, at 6 years old, with no dad, that's a pretty rough upbringing. And so luckily I had a lot of good people around me, and my uncles, all hunted, but I never really got into it. But at the age of 12, my mom met another guy that was my stepfather. And he had a 1,300-acre dairy farm that we moved to in Vermont. So we moved from New York to Vermont, and that's where hunting really was born in my blood. I mean, you could go pheasant hunting, rabbit hunting, bear hunting, moose hunting, deer hunting. And so I started pheasant hunting with a 410 Savage 22 over and under break barrel. That was my first gun. And then I got a Marlin 22, short, little tiny 22. And I remember I would just shoot all day, Shawn, all day. Like that's all I would go out and practice. And I think that's how I became such a good shot. But my stepdad would take me in the middle of the winters up there to go deer hunting. And we'd go 2-3 miles into the woods, and he'd plant me by a tree in 6 feet of snow and then take off. It was miserable. I mean, it was fucking horrible. I was just like, I'd sit there and I'd get done, Shawn, and my toes were turning black from it being so cold. And so I ultimately was like, man, I love hunting, but I don't like hunting with this guy. And I could say this because my mom's not with him anymore, but God forbid he ever hears this. But I got tired of going with him, and he had never killed a deer in his life. So I was like, man, I got to find some people that know how to kill deer. Well, that didn't happen. And I grew up, went to college, stopped hunting, had a pretty tumultuous, teenage years, did a lot of things I shouldn't have done, got really, really lost on drugs and partying and stuff like that. But I got in the mortgage industry, started making money, which only made it worse. And then I found the Lord in 2006, and that changed everything. And that's when I started going to church, started hunting with guys like Ron. And I just told myself, I was like, my dream is to have a piece of land that I can go back to being that little boy again. Like, I want to go to a place that I can go and I can hunt. And sitting there and looking at Ethan's face that day, that was a special moment. It brought me back to who I wanted to be growing up. So it was special to have that with you. It was an honor.
Yeah, that was cool. I mean, I remember, and I didn't really know that. You sometimes, and I've said this to other people. Sometimes when people approach you and they do things for you, you don't know why they're doing it because it's something that maybe have happened to them in their lives, and you never want to steal that joy from them because you're giving, even though they're doing something for you, that's their joy that they're doing it to fulfill something in their life, and you never want to steal that from them. I always said that like I've had this when people come up and people have tried to pay for a meal when I was in uniform or something like that, and you could see that they were probably about the Vietnam era, you know, age wise, and they would be like, oh, you don't let them do that. I'm like, and I'd have to tell them afterwards. I'm like, look, I do that because you don't know that their age frame, they could be Vietnam veterans and they're doing what nobody did for them when they come home. And if you tell them no, you're stealing the joy from them that they wish that they had when they came home from Vietnam in the
Absolutely.
in the struggle. And so that's why it was like I was almost overwhelmed when you told me after, you had texted me like I think that day or the next day and you told me like the whole story and it was like I know we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that in a little bit, but that was like it was very overwhelming because I knew how much at that point it meant to you. And that's why I say I'll kill a lot of deer, but that will be special because it was shared between me and Ethan, but to be there and how much it meant to you was kind of like important to see that it impact, especially knowing um that your dad and his military service and that you had kind of shared with that so you've got this passion for hunting. I've had some really other and cool encounters. You have another piece of property that I've had probably the best encounter rattling a buck in ever during archery
That was
season
good.
there
That was good.
during Nolansville. Like I had this buck, this big old, I'm talking big old monster buck, come in there at that property in Nolansville. Like I'm 20 feet up in a tree and I was scared to death because he came in so mad.
Really?
Yes, yes. I don't know if I ever told you this, but I was there by myself. And he came like blowing snot bubbles and like everything. And I needed him to take like 4 more steps to get like to the shooting lane. And like, I mean, he came, I was rattling. I tell the story. I probably travel around the country, do a lot of expos and stuff. And I probably tell that story about rattling that buck in to probably more people across the country about how cool it was to experience because it's never really the kill, it's the experience of the hunt and everything, the
Yeah.
experience of seeing that buck come in there and see him just come in the way he did, like it's pissed off that he was ready for a fight. It was crazy to watch him
That
have.
property, that property is really, really cool because it's very contrasting to where you and Ethan killed the deer, which is an open field. So your listeners, my 17 acres is a deer house, really open field, and I've got stands around it, but they have this one entry point where they all hang out. That's where I put my food plot this year. But York Road's cool because it's just such dense hardwoods and that mountainous, terrain. I mean, it's like a Gatlinburg type setting, and it's just
Yeah,
like gnarly and wet and cold. And I tell people, I'm like, look, if you go over there, you're not going to see 40 deer, but
yeah.
you go over there, you're going to see some nasty, gnarly old deer up there. And you got one of the best, and I don't believe it's been killed yet, unless, Lucas, Ron's son. First day I let him hunt out there. That guy goes out there, and he ain't out there 45 minutes, and we heard a gunshot, and he killed one of the biggest bucks that's out there, and it's still probably the biggest buck that's been killed out there. But that's a cool piece of property.
It is, and Ethan had a big encounter with a buck similar to that size, probably like a week after I had that one rattle in, and he was hunting with a muzzleloader, and I was close by, so I let the buck walk, and I knew he was going to, but he couldn't get him to stop. He was chasing the dog, and he still to this day still talks about that buck and how big it was, and so it was a lesson. I said next time I said. I said, if you whistle, I said, you can whistle. I said, next time, just say, hey. You only got to get it to stop for like 2 seconds.
That's all you got to do. That's right.
Stop for like 2 seconds
Don't be scared of it.
When they're chasing that doe. And so he still talks about that buck and at that property. So I've had a lot of cool things with that deal, and like even more connected. Like, so we shot a lot of content for what we do for social media on the farm here in Kentucky. And Shawn was the one who helped me when I retired from the Army to get the farm here in Kentucky. And so like he's been, when I say like he's been integrally part of like, you know, what I do, it's been really, really cool to have him from a hunting side, but also from a, you know, a business perspective per side to help me navigate. Because this is the thing that nobody tells you when you go to get out of the military. You have all these programs, but to figure out how to make them work, Shawn and his team went out of their way to make it work and help me get to where I am today. And so that was like really special. And so like now I walk out my back door and, you know, I got this awesome piece of property, and I got some monster bucks walking around here, and you know, it's really, really cool to do that. So you've been integral part, like
came full circle, brother, right? It all came full circle.
Came full circle and everything like that. Oh yeah.
There's Ron Jr. I'll send this to you for your readers, but you can kind of see the spread on it right there alone.
Yeah.
You know, but
yeah, right there. It was cool.
But what stand were you in with Ethan? Was that the one where you were like on the ground blind or up in the tree?
I was up on a tree.
Yeah.
And he was
the one that's actually parallel to it.
Yeah.
Ground blind.
And then he had the ground blind down there, and it was kind of. He was just kind of off to the left down there. But it's kind of when you first come up that ridge line. Yeah. Come up the ridge and it falls that first little plat.
Seems like that's where they all like to cross.
Yeah, there's a huge trail that crosses right there, and I mean, it would just be beaten down where they would come out of that thicket, you know, coming down through there. And so it was funny to watch his reaction and everything, because I saw the deer coming. I'm like that's when you do the dad thing and you just let him see if he's gonna get to take it. And so
you got my blood going, brother. I'm looking at my calendar right here. Can I get out there today? I'm like, because I haven't hunted it yet this year.
Yeah,
it's just been sitting there, which is actually pretty good. But did you feel like that mid ridge? Running across that mid ridge was better than up on the top of that ridge? Because I feel like up on the top of that ridge, the only deer I see up there are the big old gnarly ones. And it's like, you might sit up there 5 times and not see anything.
I probably had more activity like on the mid ridge area. I mean, I saw a lot of deer in that mid ridge area, because that's really that travel, that corridor, and not just the deer, but you had turkey activity like crazy. Like I remember getting up in my climber right there and not realizing that I climbed a tree right next to a bunch of turkeys roosted in the tree before sunset, or before the sun came up in the morning at sunrise. And it is just right there is, I know Lucas killed one out of there in that midsection. He killed one right there. So it's really good, that midsection. And, you know, I joke, like, I hunt Alabama and Kentucky, and we were able to put food plots and feeders in and things like that. But, you know, I hunted Fort Knox the other day, and I had a real cool encounter with some deer that I just found some trails, and it reminded me when I'm hunting that property there in Nolensville, like that's really when it gets back to heart of deer hunting, is really if you don't have that, find those trails. And that's what we did when we were there in Nolensville, was we were just able to find that beaten trail. And there's really a rub line that when we talk deer hunting there, that rub line that I kind of follow that makes that property so successful. And you figure that rub line out right there, that's where they come in. Those big bucks kind of come in, and they were cool. So it's just, like I said, I've had some really cool experiences either hunting with you or hunting some of your properties. And it's just, you know, just to kind of go along with it. So, and that's been really, really awesome deal. And especially to have Ethan along as part of that, and it's really cool. So, but
anytime, you guys are welcome back, you know?
Yeah. So, you know, I really wanted, and what the other part I want to talk about is on the podcast today is talk about, you know, you brought it up briefly when we talked about that hunt with Ethan, but, you know, you talked about your dad, and I elaborate a little bit more on that. Like, what is it like? he was a military guy, and that's something that we kind of wanted to talk about. Like that struggle is real. Like how that, I mean, he took his life. We see that a lot, and we don't talk about that whole lot. Like the effects it has on the family members, and how you kind of, I know like on your own stuff that you wrote about on social media, and like things that you talked about. You talk about how much that's impacted your life, and you wish that things had gone back and kind of had changed that. I know for us that I have opinions on this. Like, there's so much more that can be done for guys coming back doing that kind of stuff that they're not really addressing the problem that's kind of going on. So, kind of, if you feel like talking about Shawn, kind of talk a little bit about that, because I think that's such an important topic with our listeners and what they talk from the military perspective.
Yeah. So this is my pops. This is when he was came back in 1926, right there, and I've actually got his when he was standing in Brooklyn. I've got this tattoo. Actually, I don't know if I showed it to you, Shawn, but your viewers won't be able to see it. But I literally got my father tattooed right there, on my side.
Gotcha.
But no, this ain't about showing you all what's underneath my shirt here. But so my dad, here's what I learned from it and why this means so much to me. Because I do believe everything in life happens for a reason, and Hebrews 11:1 is my favorite verse out of all of them. But I've learned a lot from my dad's mental illness and him taking his own life, and it's been able to equip myself and be prepared for it, because I've experienced some of the same feelings and the same things. He was bipolar manic, and so I sometimes have manic moments. I sometimes feel very bipolar, and he was also depressive. I get depressed. And so for your listeners out there and your viewers, here's what I realized, Shawn. First of all, when I started feeling that way, I started realizing quickly that no one was going to come to my rescue. Right. And I mean that. And yes, there's people out there that are going to help me. But unless I actually ask for help, nobody's probably really going to pry themselves in my life and help me. The second thing was the power of faith, understanding that faith can get me through anything. And the third thing is understanding there is a will and a way to live on the other side. And I think what happened with my father was he isolated himself. I mean, I remember going down to New York with my mom when I was like 5 years old. And I remember riding down the dead of winter, and we had to go down and see my dad. And I remember because my mom had said he hadn't answered his phone for like a week. And so we went down there, and he had holed up in his apartment for almost a month. And so I do remember that was the day that we helped him and brought him and admitted him. And he had been admitted multiple times. But the reason why I say that is because he isolated. And so one thing I've always realized is when I start feeling this way, even though I want to go home, lay in bed, don't want to be around anybody, or do worse things, put bad things in my body, I realize I cannot do that and isolate. And I've got to go be around people, and I've got to be authentic and real and say, hey, I don't have this all figured out. I'm not ashamed of it, but I don't know what to do, and I don't want to live like this. And I think the first thing is understanding that, because I think if my father would have said, hey, I don't like the way I feel, and he did try to go get help, but he didn't have faith, and he did not have a strong circle of men around him. And the thing that I realized through all of that is this is who we are as people. And if you served our country, you've even got more of a challenge because you've got these memories and experiences that you had to endure. His thing was he was the tail gunner, and he kept telling my mother, he's like, there's innocent faces that I'll never know who these people were, that I was taking their lives. And he ultimately, that guilt and that shame just got to him. So now what I do is the opposite. I'm a very open guy. I'm very direct. I'm very straightforward with how I'm feeling and how others are feeling. I will sit with people in silence. And I'm the type of guy that I think we really need to start asking, like, no, how are you really doing? Or no, what can I really pray for you for? And that's when you're going to find strong men are going to see some safety in saying, well, dude, let me just tell you, like, things are pretty jacked up at home right now. My addictions have come back. I'm finding myself wanting to isolate. And honestly, I'm not really sure if I want to continue. And those are those moments you got to climb yourself out of and fight like the warrior that you are, and go to somebody and fight in a different way and say, hey, I'm in a bad place right now. Only imagine if my father had social media. I talk a lot about it on social media, but imagine if my father was on social media and a friend was able to say, hey man, are you doing okay?
Yeah.
Or maybe he read something that was like one of my posts that I put up, or somebody else's post about, you know, having these sorts of thoughts and what to do about it, and that you're not alone. So yeah, that's kind of what drives me. You know, it's a lot of my why right now, Shawn, is serving our military, serving people that are battling this, and equipping people for, hey, this is probably going to pop up in your life somewhere.
I think that's important, and I think you talked about that isolation piece. For military guys, it's even more because you're part of the 1%, so you really feel more isolated than anything. But I think you brought a really key point of like being openly and talking about it, because I think I talk about this with my boys, right? Because I think you're really key on this whole deal, and it's one reason I wanted to elaborate and talk more about this. I say this a lot. It's lonely at the top. If you're going to be a successful person, you're going to realize that it is very lonely, because success leads to you feeling isolated a lot, because you're
Yes.
going to have to make decisions and you're going to have to do these things where you're not going to have a lot of people around you. Do you find that to be the truth? And I think that's why we don't talk about that part enough.
That one I've really had to learn, and I've struggled with that, to be honest with you, Shawn, the last couple of years. You know, you always hear the term it's lonely at the top, but you kind of think it's just like successful people or athletes or, you know, saying that, right? And then you start getting into life and you start realizing that you might be cut from a different cloth and you want to do different things than most average people. And, or maybe you want to have an income that's, you know, above average. I mean, in my family, you were taught to like make $40,000, have a 401k, work for 30 years and then retire. That was life. And I quickly realized, I was like, I don't want to live life like that. I want to make millions of dollars. Like, I want to buy real estate. Those are the things I want to do. And over the last couple of years, Shawn, I've had to really, really learn that at the level that I play, which is like a pro athlete, which is like a person serving our country, like you guys, like you are in your own category. And there's days I'll find myself where I don't know who to call because they're not going to relate to my problems. You know, like I've got a motorhome. It's a beautiful motorhome. I sold it, like, and I sold it to this guy and he's giving me like these legal troubles now because he didn't do an inspection. I'm like, who do I call about that? Like my friends, like, and then there's other times that like, the other thing I've realized, Shawn, and I don't know if you've ever felt this way, but when you play at that level, sometimes it feels like you cycle through your relationships in your life. And it's like, yeah, you have the Rons and that are always there. But I'm like, man, why can't I just keep the same group of 3, 4, 5 friends for, you know, more than a couple of years? Well, it's because you're always leveling up. You're always looking to how to improve. And that gets really, really lonely. And I've had to learn that in the last couple of years.
I think that's really a key piece when you talk about mental health, and like when you talk about getting out of that cycle. And I don't think we talk about that enough, right? Um, you know, that's why it's good to have healthy avenues to get out there. That's why I love hunting. That's why I love fishing, because you need things that help normalize that dopamine in your body to help you to have that release to get out and things like that. I talk about from the military perspective. I mean, the things that I've done downrange, I mean, those are very, very big adrenaline rush type deals. And you come back and you're asked to be a normal individual in
Yes.
society, and it just doesn't happen. That's the part where, when we, from our perspective, we don't talk about enough on the military side. It's like, hey, you want me to be a normal individual and you've asked me to do these things. I mean, it's we joke about it, but there's a meme that is this guy on a gun truck in Afghanistan with a flak jacket and a sleeveless T-shirt with a hand mic up to his ear, and it says, "Realizing I will never be this cool in my life ever again." I mean, when you put it into that perspective, and then you come back, and so so you feel isolated, and then you do, if you it goes back to, when we were getting ready to get on the podcast, we were talking about my gun truck, and all the guys here, they're all of us are all highly successful, from my driver to my gunner to my RTO. They're all highly successful, right? And I think you do, exactly, if I asked them, they would probably say the same thing that you said. I have people that I'm close to, like I've been close to my whole life, like, but that's because I've been since I was little close to them, right? Two guys that I'm just close to, right? But I cycle through a lot of people along the way.
Right.
I have mentors that I have in my life, like Ron and things like that, that I work with continuously. But friends, you just to continue to cycle through those, and I think that that's kind of a big key, and that's what creates that isolation, that loneliness, and I also find I did not know this. This is till I went to Command and General Staff College. I wish I had known this earlier in my adult life. So I'm really big into understanding the your whether you're introvert, extrovert, all those
Yeah.
things.
Oh, Myers-Briggs.
Right, Myers-Briggs. I couldn't think. I was like, yeah,
Yeah.
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 I wish that someone had explained that to me earlier in my life. And so, like, what I found, and when you actually dive into it, people that are highly successful tend to be more introverts than they are extroverts. And what I did not understand was this: like, an introvert can stand up and talk in front of 1,000 people and it not ever bother 'em, like whatsoever. But to talk like when in a one-on-one interaction, it scares the crap out of them.
Yes.
So then they have this very small circle of people around them, and so then it creates that more isolation of a deal to them. So
Yes. Yes, absolutely it does. I have a question for you. Let's talk about that. Like what by the way, I didn't know this. Extrovert, introvert. Like introvert, I like to be by myself. I like to be in a tree stand. Well, yeah, that's
yeah,
true. But I found out extrovert, introvert is where you get your energy.
right, it is.
And I'm like, "Oh, well, I really am an extrovert. I just don't like people."
Yeah.
you know. But the question I had for you was this: so when people start finding themselves in that place, what do you think the key is for them to snap out of it? How do you equip yourself? Like, I'm just some things are going through my mind, but I'm curious what you say. Like, when people find themselves in that place, what are some things they got to do to dig themselves out of that real quick?
Well, first of all, it's self-awareness. You got to be aware that that's what's kind of going on, and you got to know that's a problem for you. And then the other thing too is what I started doing was when I realized that was when I was about a major in the military. I started finding opportunities, and it was through my fishing, doing demos for Lowrance Electronics to put me in positions to make me in uncomfortable situations to help me take what was my weakness, to improve it to me, right? And so that made me more comfortable with dealing with it when I understood, put me in uncomfortable situations that I knew I was going to be uncomfortable with ahead of time. So
Yeah.
it helped me learn how to become more self-aware of it. Now for me, I'm very fortunate because I have Archer, my service dog, right?
Right.
So I get to travel with him all over the country. So whether it's going to SHOT Show, bit like those would be very like I love interacting with people because that's part of what we do, but it can be very overwhelming throughout the day. So he becomes the break off point where they interact with him, and I don't have to focus so much on so much energy being exerted in those and what I call them intimate one-on-one conversations because the dog becomes kind of the break off piece of it for me.
That's never
So
thought
if you
about that.
so you have to find whatever kind of works for you in those kind of situations. Like you have to know, like it's that self-awareness to know that it's happening, and then figure out what it is to kind of like step away and be like, hey, that's the tough thing. And the problem is when you are highly successful, you run companies, you do stuff high up in organizations. It's hard sometimes to step away to be able,
Really is.
that's why you have to be so like, you know, it's just so draining sometimes, right? That's why like you're like it's just it's you get frustrated. I think the biggest thing too is like you don't take that out on your personal life, right?
Yes.
That your family and everything like that becomes like the biggest struggle. But I think the biggest thing is having these conversations like you and I are talking about right now. I think the more we have these conversations, the better we can be open. Like being a tough man does not mean that you can't have these types of conversations that say that you're vulnerable about these issues. I think that is a big misconception. You can be a tough guy and say I'm vulnerable about these,
Right.
which was a big shift. Growing up, the guys just didn't do that. You didn't open up about, hey, these things are bothering me. And I think that's what, like in your dad's situation or many more like him, that's become a big problem. I will tell you this, me personally, for the VA, I do a once a month counseling appointment, just kind of as a check, to be able to go in, to be able to somebody that I can openly open up, and I hate to use this word, the safe space where I can talk about these things that I don't have to be judged, at that high level. And I think
Yes.
that's so important. I'm a big proponent of counseling, whether it's just to get it off your chest or types of scenarios, because I use it quite frequently, you know. And so that really helps me a lot.
I just was typing out a few notes because I don't want to forget it. Like you brought up a few valid points. I think this is really, really something that obviously there's professionals out there, Shawn, that, know more about this than we do, but just as real men, like on the ground, boots on the ground, it'd be so cool to have like a 5-step, like, hey, if you find yourself in these dark places, like here's 5, like first thing I tell people is what you just said, self-reflection, number 1.
Yeah.
And then right next parallel with that is self-accountability, right? So I've found myself in places, and the first thing I have to do is I have to self-reflect what's really going on here. Dude, you are like, this has been continuing, like this is something you need to acknowledge. And then number 2, self-accountability. Hey, what are you putting into your mouth, your mind, and your heart right now that can be stopped immediately? Like, hey, you might want to stop drinking, or you might want to stop smoking weed. That, some of these things probably definitely are not helping you out, right? You might want to stop hanging out with that dude that always has the weed, right? I'm just being real here.
Yep.
And so I found myself 2 years ago in my worst place ever. Now, it might have been because I was living in an RV with my family for 6 months, building a home, but I was drinking, I was smoking marijuana to numb the pain of disappointment. And I was like, I'm going to end up like my father. And I checked myself in to a place out in Arizona, PCS Services. It's where Mike Tyson went when he got out of prison. And it was a 7-day outpatient intensive. It was from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. every day for 7 days. You had 12 different doctors, psychologists, therapists, nutritionists around you, counselors. And they tailored my day and everything I went to between group or individual counseling to specifically what I had dealt with, which was childhood trauma. When somebody tells you that your dad jumped off a bridge, the first thing you do as a little boy is you say, well, if he would have loved me, he probably wouldn't have done that. And that's a very, very toxic thing that breeds. The other thing is I lost identity. Military might end up experiencing this. So one of the third or fourth things I had to remind myself was I always, when I get to this place, I have to go back and remind myself of my identity is not in what I do or what I have done. It's who I am as a person in Christ every day. And that was a season. And now he has a new season for me. And I need to equip myself, and I need to be a good steward of this. And so I went to PCS for 7 days. I found out that a lot of that stuff I was doing, Shawn, was just because I was afraid to disappoint people. And I was afraid people wouldn't love me. And so that's why I partied. That's why I did this. That's why I numbed the pain. And it was probably the best money I ever spent in my life. And I tell people about it. I talk about it all the time. But yeah, it's that self-reflection and self-accountability, I think, is step 1 and 2 that you just have to dive into. And then you have to exercise your faith, and you got to have strong people around you after that.
Yeah, I think that's key. I mean, and you being open and honest to kind of talk about it, like that is like so important, because not enough people, they want to hide it and be like, oh, I don't want anybody to know. But I think we should celebrate the fact that that shows that you are a tough guy, that you are willing to tackle problems, you are willing to be accountable to people in your life, that you are showing. That's the problem, that to me, if you're not willing to be accountable to the people in your life, and that you're not willing to identify, it shows more weakness on your part, right? I think that's what we've got. That's the narrative that we've got to kind of send people, that if you want to be strong, there's no weakness in being vulnerable. The weakness is hiding. The weakness is running away from it. You know, accepting that you have the problem, accepting that you have all these issues that you kind of deal with, because none of us are perfect. Definitely, there's definitely not, you know, anything that we're ever going to do with it, you know, that makes us, because there is a lot of things that you don't know that you have, that when stressful things happen, things in your past come up and you don't know until it happens. And if you're not willing to deal with them, they're just going to continue to treat the symptom and not the problem of it.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
I think that's where we've kind of gone. And I think the more we teach our kids that thing, you know, I'm still about teaching, you know, them to be, you know, guys to be rough and tough and girls to be girls and all those things. But you also got to teach, you know, there's ways to be emotionally open without sacrificing those things. And that's having guys like you that do those things and share their heart and to share those messages, because I think that's what we're missing in society as the most. You know, we need to celebrate the fact that we are wanting to open up and people like that want to share those kind of stories and to share the vulnerability. Hey, I'm not a perfect person by any means. I mean, I got all these flaws, but what makes me perfect is the fact, or what not perfect, what makes me a human being that is vulnerable is that, and I think you hit it on the head, that your identity is not wrapped up into one thing. And I've said this for years, because I always said this when I was in the military, that could all be taken away from you in a moment's notice.
Yes.
And I'm not Shawn Dalrymple, the retired lieutenant colonel. I'm not Shawn Dalrymple, Army Bachelor. I'm just Shawn Dalrymple. And I think when you tie it up into what your identity is, not who you are as an individual person, you lose your way in life. And I think those are the kind of key piece. Hey man, we got a lot of great stuff. We could talk more and more. I think I'd love to have you back on at some point. We could talk like this. These are kind of intellectual conversations that from their outdoor experiences, meeting guys like you. That's why I think like that. You never know who you're going to meet in life. Why that chance encounter on a fishing trip leads to conversations like this right here.
Right? That's right. That's right. I'd be happy to come back anytime, Shawn. I'd love to have you down and hunt anytime. And maybe you could be a guest sometime on my podcast. So my podcast is The Hope Dealer. So the hope, I used to be a dope dealer. Now I'm a hope dealer, right?
Right.
The Hope Dealer podcast. And it's on iTunes. It's on Spotify. And we bring real people on there. Jonathan was one of my guests a little while back since he got on drugs, served 10 years in prison, and got out and is very successful now. We've had some great stories on there. So I would love to have you on it sometime, and I'd love to come back anytime.
Yeah, appreciate it. Hey, if you guys want to know more about Army buck, bass, or hog or duck, go to forceonforesttv.com and make sure you guys check out the show on the Sportsman's Channel, Aaron Army Buck Hunters Force on Force, and we'll see you next time. Cool.
Thanks for listening to the Force on Force podcast. Join us next time as we dive into more topics from the Force on Force Talk. For more information or to learn how to join the organization, visit our website at forceonforesttv.com.